Welcome. Today we're going to hear the experiences of several American migrants who didn't have an easy time of it. Write in the comments where you're listening from and if you know similar cases. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones. Let's begin. I arrived at this crossing without knowing it would end up being the worst desperation of my life. I left my small town in rural Kentucky with the promise of helping my family get out of debt. We didn't have money even for food. My dad had passed away from an illness, and my mom was too weak to work. I felt like I had no choice but to take the bus that would carry me west, with the hope of crossing state lines and finding a job that paid better. I never imagined how difficult everything would be or the horrors we'd face along the way. From the start, the road felt tense to me. I joined a group of migrants at a spot near Chicago, where a transporter crammed us into the back of a van. We were about 15, squished against each other, scared of every checkpoint, every corrupt cop who might stop us. When we had to pass a control point, we'd duck down and pray not to be discovered. In that journey, the anxiety hit me so hard I could barely breathe. Through the van's cracks came hot air, and every breath tasted like dust. After several days, we reached a semi-desert area in the southwest. A suffocating heat welcomed us, and a guide, a man with a rough look and tattoos on his arms, promised to lead us to the other side. We paid what we didn't have. Some handed over their last savings. Others had to promise to send more money after crossing. My hands shook as I gave him my share. I knew my family had borrowed to scrape that amount together. It was there that I realized if I failed, I wouldn't just lose my life, but my family's hope too. The guide ordered us to walk down a dusty path as the sun began to set. We were a diverse group. Mrs. Eleanor, a woman in her 50s, ready to do anything for her grandkids. Jake, a skinny kid of 17 who talked about his sick mom. There was also a couple, David and Laura, with their baby in arms, who cried now and then from the heat. I kept quiet. I didn't know anyone, but my eyes saw the same terror reflected in every face. If the day's heat was unbearable, the night didn't bring much relief. We walked in complete darkness to avoid patrols. The guide went ahead and signaled silently for us to stick to the brush. We were supposed to reach a spot to rest, but time passed, and we found nothing like a safe place. We could only push forward with our hearts in our throats. At times, I felt my head spinning, as if the fatigue and thirst were fading me away. In the dim light, I heard a strange rumor, something like a lament coming from the earth itself. I turned to see if anyone else had heard it. Tom, a sturdy man behind me, looked at me with huge eyes. I knew he felt that strange vibration under our feet too. Jake let out a groan and asked the guide if we were near some graveyard or something. The guide ignored him, quickening the pace. The more we advanced, the more I felt the ground exhaling whispers. It was a mix of hums and unintelligible prayers that made our skin crawl. Suddenly, the guide stopped dead, asking for silence. I felt my heart pounding so hard I feared it could be heard for miles. Several of us huddled behind a scrawny bush. That's when a helicopter sliced through the sky, lighting up sections with its spotlight. We pressed ourselves to the ground, hoping not to be detected. In that moment, I'd swear those vibrations or underground murmurs intensified. One by one, my companions turned to me with terrified eyes. It seemed like the desert was gaining a voice. When the helicopter moved away, we ran to advance before it returned. The guide led us to a dip in the terrain, a space like a dry gully where a thread of muddy water ran. There, he let us refresh. I took a sip. Despite the murky water, the fear of dehydration outweighed my disgust. I noticed Jake sitting, crying silently. I approached and offered some encouragement with pats on the back. He confessed to me that he felt something evil stalking us. I didn't know if he meant the police or those voices seeming to come from underground. As we resumed the march, I noticed a nauseating smell. Several started coughing, covering their faces with shirts. A few yards ahead, we discovered why, among the scrub, silhouettes in decomposition stood out. Maybe they'd been migrants who couldn't go on. Seeing those bodies turned my stomach. Mrs. Eleanor knelt and let out a hurried prayer. The couple with the baby cried in pure horror. We all knew that if something went wrong, we could end up like that, anonymous under the merciless sun. We kept advancing without escaping that smell of death. The guide didn't flinch, just hurried the pace, muttering that on the trail, that's how things were. That night, we barely found a rocky nook to sleep. My bones begged for rest, but pressing my ear to the ground only intensified that horrible feeling that the desert spoke a strange language. I had nightmares. I dreamed the sand moved like a sea of hands pulling me. I woke up sweating, heart in a fist. At dawn, we set off without eating anything. A couple of crackers I had left, I shared with Jake. He thanked me with a broken voice. We started noticing supplies dwindling fast. The guide said in half a day, we'd reach a meeting point where someone would give us food and water. We had to trust. I wondered if that someone existed or if the guide just wanted to motivate us to keep walking. David, the young dad, confessed desperately that his baby wouldn't stop whimpering. With cracked lips from thirst. We walked all day without traces of those promised supplies. The heat was so brutal that sometimes I'd close my eyes without realizing. I'd wake up stumbling over rocks. In the distance, we spotted something that looked like an abandoned farm. The guide ordered us to approach. We found a couple of collapsed rooms and a well full of murky water. Several rushed to fill their mouths, but a sulfur smell repelled us. One person from our group tried a sip and nearly vomited. There was nothing to use there. The guide peered into a half-ruined shed and suddenly let out a scream. He ran back, pale. We asked what he saw. At first, he refused to explain. Just said to keep going. Since the group was desperate, we entered and saw marks on the wall like claw prints and dried blood traces. I felt chills thinking something terrible might have happened. The mind flew to the idea of travelers attacked by animals or violent people. The silence became unbearable. We left the farm and continued. A chilly wind blew at dusk, contrasting the day's heat. We shivered without much sweaters or blankets. Suddenly, I heard back there the baby's cry rise in intensity and then its abrupt silence. With the darkness I couldn't see its face. It hurt my soul to imagine it suffering that cold. Laura, the mother, cried softly, fearing her child would get sick. I tried to give her a cloth from my backpack to protect the baby. With every mile, a presence in the dim light became palpable that we couldn't define. Sometimes it was a whisper in the bushes, sometimes a shadow slipping in the corner of the eye. Jake squeezed my arm, assuring we weren't alone. The guide insisted, "Don't stop." I felt a deep hole in my stomach, a mix of hunger and terror. Mrs. Eleanor prayed louder, invoking saints. The couple could barely walk with the baby on their back. In a critical moment, the little one stopped moving. Laura screamed. David knelt. We feared the baby had died from cold or dehydration. Our efforts to revive it felt useless. Suddenly, it let out a faint sigh. It clung to life, but its cry didn't come. The guide yelled there was no time for a long stop. Some wanted to protest, but desperation blocked the words. We resumed the walk with the anguish of carrying a dying baby. Later, we stumbled upon the most terrifying episode. While dragging our feet, we spotted two silhouettes. At first, we thought it was police or armed guards. We hid behind rocks, trapped in panic. The guide turned on his flashlight cautiously, and for an eternal second, it lit up human figures standing in the middle of the terrain. Motionless. They were lifeless bodies, with open eyes, held in an unnatural way, as if something had nailed them to the ground. Their faces showed an expression of anguish. A silent scream stuck in my throat. Jake dropped the flashlight and backed away. Mrs. Eleanor nearly fainted. The guide cursed softly. We detoured the route, trembling, without understanding what diabolical force could leave those people in that state. I felt fragile, like a dry leaf at the mercy of the wind. We barely managed to get away from that horror scene. I heard the guide speed up the pace. He said in a couple hours, we'd reach a hideout where we could sleep a bit. With remnants of energy, we followed like zombies. I wanted to scream or cry, beg for a miracle. I could only grit my teeth and drag my legs. I thought of my sick mother, the debt we couldn't pay, and that my only option was to keep going or die like those unfortunates. When the sky started to lighten, we reached a ridge overlooking a dusty valley. The guide pointed to some bushes, assuring that behind them we'd find an underground refuge. It was a tunnel that smugglers sometimes used. He promised water and some food. We descended carefully, knees shaking. Indeed, there was a hole leading to a dirt passage. The air smelled of mold, and I felt nausea right away seeing the refuge's state. Trash, damp cardboards, and a rotten smell. With no other option, we settled in. I hugged my niece trying not to cry. The baby barely breathed. Laura talked to it trying to console. My eyes filled with tears thinking that even if we survived, our souls would be marked by all we'd seen. Jake curled up in a corner, shaking nonstop. Mrs. Eleanor kept praying for a bit of mercy. The desert's murmurs echoed in my mind. I tried to empty my head, adjusting to the dimness. None of us had eaten decently. So we escaped reality. Some slept from pure exhaustion, others stayed in a silence of terror. The guide went out saying he'd get supplies from a meeting point. Eternal hours passed, and he didn't return. We feared he'd abandoned us. The afternoon filtered through the entrance. The heat rose inside like an oven. A sharp odor impregnated every breath. We started coughing. The anguish consumed me. We didn't know if it was more dangerous to stay or try to leave. At night, we heard the screech of some creature crawling near. We all held our breath. Around midnight, the guide finally returned with a jug of warm water and some bread. He distributed the minimum, laughing to himself. The urge to kill him ran through my veins, but I was trapped. Jake drank the water greedily. David and Laura tried to give the baby a trickle of liquid. The guide repeated that little was left to cross, just a stretch watched by cameras and another by dangerous currents. I shuddered thinking we still had to face the authorities, nature's hostility, and who knows how many more threats. I wondered if we'd make it alive. I recalled the nameless bodies we'd seen under the sun, those two standing corpses, as if something sinister had preserved them in a macabre pose. I thought of Mrs. Eleanor's faith, Jake in his need to help his sick mom, David and Laura with their baby on the brink of death, and my own debts, my fears. I felt a choked cry, silence and sorrow, a suffering that pierced all my skin. I looked at the others with a knot in my throat, and they looked back the same way. We were travelers trapped between death and misery, with ghosts around us and a guide who might betray us. We only had each other in that dimness wired with terror. I don't know how this story will end. I don't even know if I'll tell it alive. I just wish that if someone reads it, they understand how much pain and vulnerability in American migrant lives, risking everything for an uncertain future. That they feel in their flesh our fear, our cry, and that stab of broken hope that nonetheless pushes us to walk. Despite the darkness and the desert's murmurs, I cling to a photo of my mother I keep in my pocket. My heart doesn't stop crying, but I keep standing. Hoping that at the turn of dawn, some light appears to show us the way out of this nightmare. Amanda hugged her daughter tightly while the desert sun beat down on their heads. They'd been walking for 7 hours since dawn, guided by a man who barely spoke to them. Along with them advanced other travelers, faces tired and feet sore. They carried bags with little water, big hopes, and fear stuck in their chests. The heat threatened to make every step unbearable, but they clung to the illusion that beyond that dusty horizon, a less cruel future awaited them than the one they'd left in their town. Ryan, a young man with tan skin and a scruffy beard, carried his younger brother, Sean, on his back to protect his blistered feet. With every stride, Sean let out groans that mixed with the crunch of sand. The guide told them it wasn't far, that before dusk they'd reach an improvised shelter near the state line. No one dared ask what that shelter looked like, or if the guide kept his promises. The silence surrounded the group like a heavy specter. On the side, a middle-aged woman, Clara, held a small religious medal in her wrinkled hand. She prayed in a soft voice every so often and hummed a song that recalled a lullaby. The dry air burned her throat. However, she repeated her plea, because faith was the only thing fighting the desperation roaring in her empty stomach. They advanced until the sky tinted a murky orange. The guide indicated they should rest. They stopped near some bushes that offered scant protection against the dry wind. Amanda sheltered her daughter with the shawl she carried. The girl was named Lily and wasn't yet 6 years old. She had a fever and a faint cry that wrung her mother's soul. With every sob, Amanda murmured words of encouragement she didn't even believe herself. It had been days since Lily smiled. Her cheeks looked flushed from the heat. The guide, a man of few words, pulled out a wrinkled map. He mumbled that a tough stretch remained, marked by patrols and deceptive terrain. Night would fall soon, and according to him, it was better to move under darkness. Amanda could barely swallow thinking of her daughter stumbling blindly or facing critters. Still, the only option was to keep going, because behind them stretched the poverty they'd left, and ahead was a dream called work. They resumed the march with the shadow growing denser. They felt the howl of the wind, a sound almost funereal echoing in the silence. At some point, they heard a strange noise, something not like any common animal. The guide tensed and ordered no lights or noise. Everyone obeyed with racing hearts. For a moment, it seemed something moved among the rocks. Crickets or large insects chirped sharply. The group huddled, fearful a vehicle might approach or someone detect them. In the dimness, several tripped, fell on the rough ground, sobbed in impotence. Ryan lost his step and lowered his brother, who lay on the sand to catch his breath. Only there they perceived a smell emerging from nearby, a sweet and putrid odor that woke nausea. Amanda covered her daughter's nose to spare her that aroma. The guide, nervous, took a look. With a lighter's help, they discovered remains of something that appeared half buried among the shrubs. It wasn't an animal, it was torn clothes, what seemed like an arm trapped in hardened sand. Someone who hadn't survived the trek. Clara crossed herself with muffled sobs. They felt dread, rage, and compassion. They knew desolation could turn to death without warning. They imposed on themselves to go forward. Each step grew longer with fatigue. They crossed a rocky territory. One of the men in the group, Mr. Harold, tripped and rolled several yards down a slope. He hit a rock and let out a muffled scream. They ran to help him. He ended up with blood on his head and a lost gaze. Without medical attention and no time to rest, he became a painful burden. The guide frowned and said it wasn't possible to carry him all. Ryan and Sean offered to help. So the group moved even slower. Every so often, the wind dragged a long, mournful groan. It was hard to tell if it came from Mr. Harold or the desert itself. Finally, the guide affirmed it was close. He waved a hand in the air pointing to rock formations barely visible under the moon. It was supposed to be that behind those rocks was an abandoned container, a kind of hideout where they could shelter before resuming the trek. The exhausted travelers followed with hopeful hearts until the rumble of an engine broke the night. The guide forced them to drop to the ground. Lights from a vehicle passed near, crunching over gravel. Maybe patrols or armed groups. No one knew for sure. They prayed silently not to be discovered. After a while, the noise faded. However, one of the travel companions, a young man named Sam, didn't get up. They called him, shook him, and saw he'd fainted from exhaustion and fear. They put some water on his lips. He recovered, but stayed so weak he barely mumbled. A strange sensation took over everyone, as if something invisible stalked their steps. Mr. Harold's accident, the half-buried remains they'd seen on the path, Lily's fever, everything created an atmosphere of sinister omen. Clara refused to let go of her medal. She gathered courage to ask for a miracle, at least to hold until dawn. They kept dragging their feet, dodging rocks with dry saliva and broken spirit. Suddenly, a cold wind started blowing, lifting dust, blinding them at times. Lily cried. Her mother calmed her with kisses on the forehead. The guide quickened the pace. He seemed nervous, as if fearing not to make it to the container in time. Minutes later, rounding some rocky outcrops, they spotted the dark silhouette of a large rusted metal container a few yards away. The group hurried with pounding hearts of hope. When they arrived, they noticed the door was ripped off one side. The interior looked dirty and cold, but offered shelter from the brutal wind. They entered cautiously. Ryan searched for a dry spot to lay the injured Mr. Harold. The guide scanned the corners with his flashlight. They found old blankets, food wrappers, and signs that other travelers had been there. A place marked by suffering, they settled for what was left of the night. Clara, with a trembling voice, decided to prepare some warm coffee in a small pot. There wasn't much water, but something hot would comfort Lily and Mr. Harold. While the fire crackled under the drafts sneaking in, everyone shared a dense silence. Sam, still weak, murmured about his family waiting in Seattle. Amanda sobbed thinking of the debts and broken dreams left in their town. Ryan clenched his fists where his brother wouldn't have medicines if they didn't reach a hospital on the other side. Clara served the coffee in plastic cups. Suddenly, they heard a whisper coming from the container's entrance. The wind blew. But that sounded like a choked voice. The guide, wary, went out to check. Everyone felt their blood throbbing in their temples. They saw the flashlight move outside. Eternal seconds passed until the beam of light went out. He didn't return. No one dared go out. Their breaths grew louder, nervous. After a while, Ryan mustered up, took the remaining flashlight, and went out, leaving the others in dimness. Outside, the wind lifted dust and sand. No sign of anyone anywhere. Ryan shouted his name without success. Suddenly, he heard a low growl and turned the flashlight instinctively. Behind some rocks, he distinguished something moving. Maybe a coyote or a hungry dog. Panic shook him. He returned to the container with tense muscles. No trace of the guide. The rest of the group entered a nightmare of uncertainty, without a guide, without knowing the exact route or the desert's traps, without papers. The only option was to wait for morning. They huddled for warmth. Lily slept with the fever not yielding. Her small body shook. Amanda's cry wrung the hearts of those present. Not even the slightest breeze was heard. An oppressive silence took over the night. Some exhausted travelers dozed a bit. Ryan forced himself to stay awake with the flashlight in hand, hoping the guide would return. Time slipped slow. Toward 4 or 5 in the morning, Mr. Harold stopped breathing with a rattle that scared Clara. They tried to revive him without success. He died in that metal room, far from his family, with a lost gaze and a broken dream. The pain and impotence broke everyone into tears. They prayed for him. When the sun paled the horizon, peeking through the container's cracks, they went out with trembling steps, dragging Mr. Harold's lifeless body. Outside, no signs of the guide, only blurry footprints mixing with rodent and wild animal tracks. In the distance, the desert plain shimmered, and farther a blurry fence. Clara raised a plea while Ryan and Sean improvised a cross with branches for the man who'd accompanied them to the last breath. They buried him as best they could in the thirsty sand. They had to go on without a guide. Those left looked at each other with teary eyes. Their bodies hunched from fatigue. Sam barely walked. Amanda carried Lily, who burned with fever. The water was running out. Still, a slow advance started toward the fence visible in the distance. The symbol of the line they longed to cross. Each step hurt. Each breath wounded the lungs. The morning brought suffocating heat. Clara went ahead a few yards to see if they found a path. The encounter with a surveillance helicopter became a new fear. They didn't know if it was rescue or trouble, if they'd be seen or ignored. The helicopter passed roaring in the sky without noticing the small group half hidden behind rocks. The anguish grew deeper. Exhausted, they continued. They walked to the edge of madness. With reddened skin and cracked lips. Near noon, they spotted smoke or dust raised by a road. They gathered strength to approach. It emerged a dusty trail. They lay on the ground, shaking from tiredness, with hope someone might pass and lend a hand. Only the wind and sun answered. Amanda pressed against her chest Lily's little body, who wouldn't stop shaking. With a hoarse voice, she called for help. Clara prayed even louder. Ryan and Sean got up and started walking aimlessly, seeking some sign of civilization. An infinite pain pierced everyone. The memory of Mr. Harold, the lost guide, the half-buried body they'd seen on the path, Lily's fever, the death stalking minute by minute. Finally, in a burst of hope, they saw an old truck advancing slowly on the trail. They ran as best they could, waving arms. The driver, a man with an incredulous face, stopped. He observed the scene of misery, moved. He offered a warm space in the back. Without questions, he loaded them. When Amanda laid Lily on the truck floor, the girl no longer responded with her gaze. The fever had sunk her into a stupor that broke hearts. The driver drove to a small town. There, two elderly women and a skinny man, without asking anything, helped unload them and take Lily to a small improvised clinic. They gave water and scant food, but enough to know goodness still existed in the world. They allowed rest on mats. One of the elderly women, with tears in her eyes, whispered she understood the pain of seeking another horizon. That night, Amanda prayed for her daughter's life and for Mr. Harold's memory, sunk in a sorrow she could barely express. Several days passed, and some decided to return home to heal wounds. Others, with broken hearts, set to try the trek again when they regained strength. Lily took time to recover, but opened her eyes with the help of basic medicines the clinic had. Amanda covered her with kisses seeing her react. Ryan and Sean, without savings or energy, stayed with the doubt if they'd reach their destination or stay stranded there forever. That painful morning revealed the desert's cruelty. They felt lonelier than ever, crying for the fallen in a merciless trek, for the disappeared guide, for families who'd wait for news that never came. They also cried thinking of the good people who still existed. In those strangers willing to offer a bowl of soup and a cardboard roof to those with nothing, they knew the longing for a better future could become a nightmare, a field of death and silence. Despite everything, each harbored a smoldering faith. They didn't know if life would allow them to try once more. They didn't know what happened to those found remains or the shadow that roamed the night. Nor if their guide escaped, was captured, or something worse claimed him in the darkness, but at least they felt they could still breathe. There were still beats in their chests, and that was a treasure many others lost under the same stars. That morning, hugged at the edge of a dusty road, they bid farewell to the temporary town with broken hope. But with the certainty that living was priority, the scars would endure, the pain would accompany them, without stopping to draw tears every time they remembered the voices of those left in the sand. In their hearts, they knew that no matter how hard they tried, forgetfulness wouldn't come. The desert would keep guarding the steps and names of so many travelers who dared challenge the horizon, carrying the dream of a dignified life and the risk of never returning.
My name is Gabriel and I'm 36 years old. Currently, I live in the United States, in the state of California. But the simple fact of remembering everything I had to go through to arrive as an immigrant to this country makes my hair stand on end. I'm originally from a troubled area in the Midwest, a place that's been going through serious social issues for a long time, so in 2017, I saw myself needing to set out from there to seek a better quality of life due to economic and legal shortages. I didn't have many emigration options that weren't crossing the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest in search of reaching the urban centers for then heading to the coast and from there climbing up to better jobs. My passage through the Pacific Northwest forests has been the most terrible experience I've had the misfortune to live. I'll start by saying I had to embark on my journey through the forest with a group of 8 people who, like me, needed to cross that hostile place. In that group of 8 people, led by a man named Marcus, who was our guide. Also going was a boy of about 10 years. It's not surprising that many people take their kids through those places in search of them having a better quality of life too. Though it's quite questionable the way they do it. The forest is so hostile that many times even adults find it hard. Now, imagine the kids. The guide Marcus led us into the forest where we walked for a long time. In the first 3 days, it never stopped raining. Day and night the rain, though light, didn't stop falling on us. Every so often, we had to stop to wring out socks or drain water from our shoes, because it could give us an infection that could turn to gangrene in a matter of hours. The noise of animals was deafening, especially birds and insects like crickets that day and night didn't stop making sounds. On top of that, we watched each other to avoid going through spots infested with venomous snakes or irritating plants, since a slight brush with them could cause a rash that infected easily. What I describe isn't even 10% of the horror lived passing through that forest. However, there was no turning back. I had to do it yes, because going back wasn't an option. That couple carrying the boy managed to keep up with the rest. The guide Marcus specified many times. Here, no one waits for anyone. Woman, elder, or child gets no more consideration, since for one, we can lose all. It's crude, but it was the truth. Along the path, in the forest, we found many things like remains. Human remains that had been there weeks or months. Some showed signs of perishing from exhaustion or a venomous bite. Others had bullet impacts. That was due to another danger in the forest. Robbers or gangs that settled in that site. Usually, they came out to rob passers-by or in the worst cases, took them and killed them for the 4th or 5th day of the hike. And with some path covered, the guide Marcus said we'd passed the hardest. The dense woods area, dangerous animals, and gangs were behind. From here on, it'd be a bit easier, but that didn't mean we let our guard down. We fell exhausted and stayed asleep right away. Some time passed, I suppose, when a scream was heard quite loud. The scream came from the boy's mother who was with us. Upon waking, we turned on flashlights and saw both the lady and the gentleman, the boy's father, very agitated. We asked what had happened, and they said their son wasn't there, that he'd disappeared. Apparently, the 3 had fallen asleep together, but at some point, the lady felt something missing. She woke and no longer found the boy. They tried to search, but he wasn't there. Alarmed by them, they asked us to help. So in the middle of the night and in the forest, we searched for the boy, who, I repeat, was about 10 years. Who shouldn't be far, or so we thought. We split into groups walking around the area looking for any clue of him, but no matter how we shouted his name, he didn't answer. While searching, I stopped a bit deeper in the forest, and when I was about to return to camp, I realized my flashlight lit up the boy sitting under a tree. The boy was squatting, shivering from cold, gaze to the ground. Quickly, I shouted and said I'd found him. I approached the little one and told him everything would be fine, not to worry. Maybe he'd gotten lost when going to the bathroom or something, I imagined. I wanted to touch the boy's head so he'd feel safer, but I didn't even have time when he quickly grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. The force he exerted on my hand was such it didn't seem like a child's, but an adult's. But very strong. I lowered my gaze, and he raised his. At some point, our gazes crossed, and I realized something horrible. That boy had a pair of eyes with a reddish tone that just seeing them made me feel paralyzed. Besides, his face had something stranger. He had an expression, but at the same time none. He made no gesture, but I could feel as if he had a face of pure evil. The boy let go and stood up. He stared at me with that red gaze full of terror. I don't know what was going through his head, but I know it wasn't anything good. At that same moment, the boy's parents arrived, who hugged him and asked what had happened. The boy said nothing, just kept silent the rest of the night. The next day, I managed to be alone with the little one's father and told him what had happened, the red gaze I'd seen in him and the violence I felt in his grip. But the man didn't pay attention. He said maybe I'd dreamed it, since his son would never do such a thing. Thank God, we managed to get out of the forest and stepping into the first town in Oregon, each person took a different path. I was happy on my part, but at the same time intrigued because that family took that boy who'd gotten lost in a forest. That same one I can swear wasn't their son, it was something else, something that looked the same. I'm sure the forest kept their real son, and they took a thing that lives inside the woods.
I'm Leonard, a border patrol officer between Texas and New Mexico. What I'm about to tell you happened in 2019, and at the time I didn't give it much importance. Now I regret not documenting it better, because I'm sure it would be irrefutable proof that in the Texas desert, things live that aren't human. I remember perfectly it was a Friday night, and I was on guard at the immigration offices. Suddenly, a call came in on the phone. It was a citizen with a home near Crockett County. He said he'd seen a group of travelers running through the area. Apparently, they were armed because gunshots were heard. That man couldn't specify if they were migrants or locals. What mattered was they had weapons and were shooting. He got to see them close and recognized that in that area, many groups of travelers pass. Upon receiving the report, 3 officers organized. Me, Officer Sanchez, and Officer Ramirez. We got in our patrol car and headed right to the place. The whole area is desert, and at night, all you see are arid fields that, though hot in the day, can become very cold at night. We inspected the terrain for tracks or signs showing where those travelers had gone. But we didn't find much. However, suddenly we heard a distant shot. Right away, we turned on the lights and drove at full speed toward the noise. Assuming they could be the same men deeper in the desert, we managed to light up a group of 5 travelers running in the middle of the darkness as if a great scare chased them. That powerful light we carried in the patrol made them notice our presence. We thought they'd run in the opposite direction, but it was the opposite. Far from fleeing, they turned back and ran toward us. Faced with that reaction, Officer Sanchez and I had to go on alert, believing maybe they meant to attack us. We saw them carrying weapons, so Officer Ramirez requested backup on the radio while we prepared for any eventuality. But to our surprise, when they were a few yards from where we were, they raised their hands in sign of surrender or giving up. Even one of them, who carried a weapon in hand, threw it to the ground to make clear they didn't want problems. The travelers approached with faces marked by terror. It was then we could notice something strange. One of the men, the one who'd thrown his weapon, also held what seemed to be an animal. Both the man and the animal were trembling. With the travelers controlled, we got out of the patrol to check them, and after making sure they had no more weapons, we cuffed them. When we asked what had happened, the man who still held the strange animal dropped it to the ground and told us a story that seemed from a horror movie. According to him, while walking through the desert, from the sand emerged a creature that started attacking the group. Due to the night's darkness and fear, they couldn't make out well what it was. Some thought it was a dog, but that beast bit them with such force it seemed about to rip off chunks of flesh. One of the travelers said it was a guide who sometimes led them. He pulled out a weapon he carried for protection and started shooting the creature while they ran to safety. After several shots and much desperation, they managed to kill that being now lying inert. Such was the level of fright that they preferred to surrender at the first light they saw rather than keep stumbling into more threats in the nightly solitude. Initially, I doubted their story, but I approached to look at the animal lying on the ground. I'd never seen anything like it. It was the size of a large dog, brown color very similar to the sand, which would have allowed perfect camouflage. It had no fur at all. The skin was thick and rough. The face vaguely recalled a canid's, though with a pair of fangs so long they stuck out like knives. It had huge claws on all four paws, bigger than any common predator in the area. At first glance, it was clear it had died from multiple bullet wounds. That traveler, whom we'll call James, swore that thing came out of the sand without warning. He was terrified of running into more creatures like that, so they gave up their plan to keep going. They decided better to surrender. We drove the travelers to the vehicle, making sure they had no serious injuries. Though they were full of scratches and bite marks, the strange beast's corpse stayed there in the middle of the desert. At that moment, I only thought maybe it was a coyote or wolf with some deformity or disease. Today, I regret not taking at least a photo. Over time, I've heard rumors and stories about strange beings inhabiting the Texas desert. Creatures that don't seem from this world. I don't know what that thing was, or if there are more out there. But one thing I'm sure of, on that occasion, I came across something that shouldn't exist, an animal I just can't classify. And if someone had told me I'd see something like that someday, maybe I wouldn't have believed it. But now that I've lived it in my own flesh, I won't doubt any more the tales circulating about the unknown in these arid lands.
My name is Martin, and I want to tell you what for me is the most terrifying story of my whole life, which happened a few years ago when I was crossing a dangerous river in search of a better life with a group of travelers. On that occasion, we were in the darkness of the night on the bank of the Mississippi River, which marks a divide between states. I remember we walked along the bank looking for the area with the lowest flow, since it was rainy season and it was very dangerous to cross anywhere. That night, we were guided by a smuggler who knew the path. More or less knew where there was a flow low enough to cross without drowning. After a few miles of walking, we found a point that seemed accessible. "This is it. Here it shouldn't be so deep," said the guide. But he'd barely finished speaking when a noise was heard in the full night. It was something like a melody seeming to come from the very depths of the river. We all stopped trying to locate the source of that sound. It was then we saw it, a dark and mysterious figure in the middle of the river. At first, we thought it was a log or rock, but that figure swam to the shore where we were. There, we distinguished it better. It was a woman with long dark hairs falling over her back. Her pale skin gleamed in the moonlight. But what surprised us most was her lower part, as it resembled a fish's tail, a mermaid. We exclaimed several at the same time, unable to believe what we were witnessing. That woman seemed to sing something in a language we didn't understand, but her song was hypnotic with a strange power, attractive and terrifying at once. I don't know how to describe it, but we felt a huge impulse to follow her. Wade into the water until reaching where she was. Despite knowing the current could drag us easily, her song's power was overwhelming. Without realizing, we started advancing toward her, step by step, getting closer to her position. It was at that moment that one of the travelers, I don't remember his name, only know he recovered sanity before all, shouted at us, warning to get away, that mermaid would drag us to the river's bottom. His words broke the spell, and we came to ourselves. With all the strength we could muster, we backed away, resisting the influence of her song. However, the mermaid intensified her melody. Her voice became more piercing and terrifying, as if understanding we were about to escape her trap. Thanks to that traveler's shout, we managed to get out of the mermaid's reach. We swam as best we could to reach the shore, and already out of the water, we crawled on the ground, soaked and shaking with fear, but alive. When we looked back, we saw the mermaid disappear again into the river's depths. I'll never forget that night because it was the first and I hope the last. See that I saw a mermaid in that river? Over time, I've heard more stories from travelers who swear they've seen or heard mermaid songs in the Mississippi. Some swear they're real mermaids, others say they're demons posing as them to lure the unwary. What I am sure of is that encounter marked my life forever. That night, I understood that in darkness and desperation to cross, there are forces we can't explain, and we must be very alert not to fall into those unknown dangers.
My name is Melissa, and I want to share with you the story of what happened to my brother Robert when he went as a migrant across the country. My brother currently has been working out west for near 13 years. However, the first time he tried to go, he didn't make it. It was until the second try that things finally worked. The story I tell you today happens in that first failed attempt to cross, and actually the paranormal theme is intimately linked to the reason he couldn't do it. In 2010, my brother left our town in the state of Virginia to go as a migrant across to the West Coast. At that time, he and a group of more people had contacted a guide who would take them from the eastern states through the heartland, on foot, traversing rural areas. My brother says that days before, the guide had asked for a list of things they must carry, since the walk could be very long, 5 or 6 days, depending on weather and how much surveillance there was from authorities. He warned that if they found too many agents, they'd have to change route or hide, and that would mean more time walking. The night my brother and other 10 travelers set out to embark on the crossing, they went full of illusion, but also uncertainty. The guide leading them was someone trusted. Known for having crossed many people from our area, my brother says that first night and first day were very hard. In his backpack, he barely carried 3 changes of clothes, a basic phone to notify the family when he arrived, and most important, water and food enough to avoid fainting. He doesn't know if the hardest was walking under the sun of the plains, where temperature easily exceeds 40 degrees, or resisting the night's cold, that in those same plains can drop below 0 degrees. Those extreme conditions had more than one on the brink of collapse. Still, my brother and the rest of the travelers gave each other courage, because the guide had made clear that whoever fell behind would be left. They wouldn't wait for anyone, or else they could catch them all. For the second night, my brother says they'd arrived at a zone where a big rock rose. The guide indicated there they'd sleep a few hours to recover strength and then keep going. My brother, like the others, sat under that rock's protection, ate a bit, and as soon as he settled, fell exhausted asleep. Already asleep, he says he had a nightmare. In his dream, he was standing in the middle of the plains in full night with the moon barely lighting everything around. Right in front of him was a man with his back turned. My brother felt curiosity to see who it was, so he wanted to call him, but when trying to speak, he felt as if his voice didn't come out of his throat, as if every attempt to shout was mute. Desperate, he started running toward that unknown man, but no matter how he ran, he couldn't get closer. His steps seemed to advance nothing. Desperation grew inside him, to the point he felt a knot in his throat and terrible urge to cry. When he was about to give up, that guy with his back turned around, and there my brother got the scare of his life. He realized that man he saw was himself, but turned into a corpse. It was his own face. Though not a living man's face, it was more a skeleton. With some pieces of rotting flesh hanging from the skin, my brother wanted to say something, but still couldn't speak. That corpse moved its mouth. It seemed to pronounce words, but my brother didn't understand anything it said. At that moment, my brother woke with a scream, cold sweating, hands shaking, and heart about to jump out of his chest. Several travelers turned to look at him without understanding what was happening. Out of shame, he said nothing of his nightmares. He pulled brave, rubbed his face, and got ready to continue the plan. However, that ghastly image didn't leave his head all day. When night came that same day, the guide led the group to another zone where there were ditches. There they'd stop a couple hours to rest and resume path at dawn. Just like a day before, my brother fell exhausted asleep right away from the accumulated fatigue. But though worn out, he had exactly the same dream again. Him, standing in the middle of the plains, someone with back turned, the impotence of not emitting a single sound, and finally that one turning to show his cadaveric face. Only this time a small difference happened. When that corpse spoke, my brother could hear what it said. According to my brother, the words were clear and echoed in his head. "Turn back. Don't go on, turn back." The horror he felt shook him even stronger than the night before. He woke again with a chilling scream, creating a ruckus. Some companions got scared and asked if he was okay, but again he didn't want to tell any detail. He felt a knot in his stomach, like a premonition something bad could happen. It was then, while still in the ditch, someone shouted, "There are patrol lights near." It was the guide who'd spotted a patrol car not far from there. Right away, the man ordered everyone to advance. He told them they had to run or they'd end up caught. But my brother, now remembering not only the corpse image, but also those words "turn back, don't go on," filled with panic. He says he froze, couldn't take a step. The guide tried to make him react, but he didn't move from the spot, crying from pure fear and confusion. There was nothing to do. The guide and the other travelers had to leave him behind to not be discovered. That's how my brother ended up alone in the middle of nowhere. Minutes later, the patrol, as expected, found him, detained him, and took him to a detention center. Though many would think being detained and about to be sent back is the worst, my brother says at that moment he felt great relief. It was as if he'd saved himself from something much worse, a hard-to-describe feeling. The next day, while my brother was still in custody, he heard a rumor running among the guards. They said during the previous night, a group of travelers had been attacked by a pack of wolves. Near 10 people were prey to those animals, and none survived. My brother believes that group was precisely the one he was with. And if not for that repeated dream where he himself, turned into a living dead, warned him to turn back, he probably would have been caught by that pack too. Since then, my brother got out of his mind the idea of crossing again so soon. It took him a couple years to gather what's needed to organize a safer attempt, now with different guides and taking other routes. Today, thank God, he lives out west since 13 years ago, but he still doesn't fully explain those dreams or why his nightmares. He sees it as a warning, a protection from something unknown, a message that came who knows from where and what. However, it saved his life. That's the story my brother Robert told me, and to this day I share it with many people who ask me, assuming maybe there's someone else who lives something similar. Sometimes the same desert with its mysteries and hidden forces might be warning us that not all are destined to cross at that instant, that there are events beyond the natural roaming those grounds. And I, for now, give thanks that my brother followed the sign that shouted to him, "Turn back." But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear those underground whispers calling names that aren't mine, and I wonder if the desert secrets are waiting for the next group to reveal even darker truths.